When the last of the jewels resurfaced, I felt the worst was over. I persuaded myself that it was just a spiteful prank carried out by a long-forgotten distant relative. However, I realize now that I was mistaken as I stand in the attic, peering into the dust-covered mirror and feeling the tarnished ruby necklace piercing my flesh. This is where it begins and where it all ends. Never once did the letters lie. They talked of unpaid obligations and blood of a curse that claws into the skin of anybody daring to bear the Ashburn name. It's not simply the house I inherited. She came to me by inheritance. I am now totally hers. As soon as I walked into Ashburn Hall, I could feel the dense air. The sound of the heavy oak door creaking behind me reverberated through the deserted hallways, giving the impression that the mansion had engulfed me completely. Nothing could have prepared me for the tremendous sense of abandonment, even though the lawyer had informed me of the place's state, decaying, forgotten, and unloved. Every surface was covered in dust, cobwebs clung to corners like misplaced memories, and the stillness sounded alive and eager. I now owned the house. Eliza Ashburn, the only heir to the dilapidated estate that had belonged to my grandmother Imogen Ashburn, with whom she was estranged. I didn't feel any emotional ties to the location. Not even at her funeral had I gone. Since my mother's passing more than 15 years ago, we had not spoken. Nevertheless, here I was, standing in the stately yet decaying entrance hall, the ancient key weighing heavily in my pocket. I was there to evaluate the property, determine its value, and make a decision on what to do with it. Most likely sell it. In London, I had a nice life. This eerie artifact from my family's history wasn't necessary. However, something in me changed the instant I stepped over the boundary. The home seemed to have been watching and waiting for me. A feeling of anxiety formed in my chest as I stood in the dark light, surrounded by faded photos of ancestors I never knew. I didn't think ghosts existed. However, Ashburn Hall had a distinct vibe. I was unable to fully dispel the force and weight that the house possessed, and the jewels were the start of it all. I first became aware that something was off with the ruby necklace. It was one of the several heirlooms that my grandmother had gathered with obsession over the years and kept hidden like awards in glass display cases. The necklace was gorgeous, with deep red rubies that gleamed even in the low light of the study where it was on display. I guessed it was an antique Victorian necklace. I had devoted hours to cataloguing the objects and creating a list for the appraisers, which is why I recall every detail has been taken care of, everything secured. However, the jewelry vanished 2 days later. I initially believed I had misplaced it. Though I was positive I had locked the case, maybe I had forgotten. I looked in the study and the rooms around it, but the necklace was gone. A twinge of annoyance shot through me. It was valuable, and losing it would make things more difficult. The attorney told me no one else had access to the premises when I called. Me alone, please. The town was too far away from the metropolis for any intruder to have entered undetected, and the outdated security system still worked. Nevertheless, I told myself it was only an easy mistake. Something had escaped my attention. It would appear. But I was startled out of sleep that night as I lay in the odd cold bed. The sound was faint and metallic, similar to the sound of jewelry being dragged over wood. Heart palpitating, I sat up and listened. Once more, the sound approached. Breath caught in my throat, I reached for the torch on my bedside table and stepped out into the hallway. The hallway extended in front of me, dimly lit, with uneven flooring underfoot. I went down the stairs, passed past the elegant foyer, and entered the study, following the sound. The exhibit cabinet was ajar. The ruby necklace was back, securely fastened, but the stones looked old and tarnished, as though they had been touched by something or someone. There was a letter the next morning. I hadn't noticed it the previous evening, but it was folded up nicely on the elegant mahogany desk in the study. I felt a chill down my spine as I opened the envelope, which had yellowed with age and strange calligraphy. "The debt is unpaid," the letter stated. "Blood cries out for blood. She owns the gems, and you will be soon after that." I gazed at the words, my thoughts whirling. Who was the author of this? Nobody had been around. The residence was secured with locks. However, there it was, frightening and alerting me. I really wanted to think it was some nasty joke. However, I had a feeling it wasn't. I looked around the house for the remainder of the day. I searched every drawer and obscure nook in search of hints and information that would shed light on the situation. Father letters that led me farther into my family's past had been discovered by me, stashed under furniture, concealed in old books, and strewn around like breadcrumbs. Every letter revealed a fragment of the narrative, which included a blood debt owing to an entity much older than the mansion itself, and an old curse connected to the Ashburn name. The jewels were always the focal point of it. Not only were the relics priceless, but they also served as a link to whatever evil power had been stalking my family. I felt the walls closing in on me the more I read. My rational thinking attempted to brush everything off as coincidence or fantasy. But as the days went by, the letters became more regular, and the jewels kept going missing and then coming back, each time looking more tarnished and crumbled. After that, the visions began. Flickers appeared in the mirrors first. I would see glimmers of activity, shadows where none should be. I would occasionally see it, even though at first I assumed it was just my reflection, distorted by the broken glass. But then I'd see it. Her, Imogen, her face contorted into something far worse than my memory could recall. She stood behind me in the reflection. Her sunken, dark eyes looked right through me, as if she could see right into my soul. She was silent, but her presence was oppressive. From then on, I avoided the mirrors, but it made no difference. She was in every place. She was following me, watching me. I could feel it. The messages became increasingly desperate and frenzied, and I realized that the home had taken me in. I was confined. The curse was the only path out. It was almost midnight when the last letter arrived. It was briefer than the others, and in its simplicity, almost cryptic. The inheritance is yours. You'll know if you wear it. I understood its meaning. The necklace made of rubies. After not touching it since that first night, I suddenly felt pulled to it as though by an invisible force. I unlatched the case, lifted the heavy, chilly chain, and shook my hands as I wrapped it around my neck. The home creaked the instant it touched my skin. Something dark and ancient felt like it was wrapping itself around me as the air changed and became thicker. Barely able to breathe, I lurched and stumbled towards the attic where the last puzzle piece lay. The dust-covered mirror was there, towering and menacing. My mirror twisted and shimmered as I gazed into it, revealing her to me. Imogen. Her smile was lifeless and icy. Her lips never moved, but her voice said, "You're mine now." I understood when the room grew colder and the walls closed in. The curse was more than a shadow or a ghost. She was the one. It was me. Since the night Eliza Ashburn inherited Ashburn Hall, the villagers claim that no one has seen Eliza Ashburn. They murmur about the curse, the family's troubled past, and the diamonds that remain unbroken and gleaming in the closed cases. However, on occasion, late at night, people report seeing a figure in the ancient estate's windows, with pale complexion, dark eyes, and a tarnished ruby necklace around her neck. The curse is still in effect. She also feels this way. I am aware that the statement that the deceased are unconcerned with worldly goods is untrue. They are deeply concerned. That was the day I discovered it. While I was sleeping, my mother's necklace choked me. That night, the strain from the chain was nearly too much to take. It tore into my skin as if it had been alive and writhing with purpose. I tried to scream, but nothing came out as I clawed at my neck. My bedroom's lights flickered, creating long shadows on the white walls. I think I saw a towering, motionless figure looking from the corner. I knew then that she had returned. She was also upset. The necklace has not been touched by me since my mother's funeral. Tucked away at the back of my wardrobe, it lay sealed tight in the velvet-lined lockbox holding her jewelry. It seemed almost religious, like a rite. I used to make sure the box was still secured and the contents were still where they should be every night before going to bed. It was the same way that morning. The rings and necklace were precisely where I left them. The recollection of checking the lockbox had already melted into the backdrop of my everyday activities by the time I got to work. As we got ready for an impending exhibition, the gallery was a flurry of activity. I called clients, looked over artist portfolios, and catalogued things for the most of the day. As an art curator, I had a tough profession, and I was proud of every choice I made. But I felt something gnawing at me that day. I didn't realize anything wasn't right until I got home late that evening, worn out after a non-stop day of work. My minimalist, clean-lined apartment felt off, as though something had been delicately but imperceptibly disrupted. I quickly made my way to the closet as my heart began to race. The lockbox was on the floor when I opened the door. Unlocked. A chilling feeling of fear swept over me. That wasn't as I had left it. The necklace had vanished. I assured myself that it was just stress. That was the consensus of everybody. Over drinks the following evening, my best friend Mira informed me, "You're overworked, Sophia. You need to get over your paranoia. It is merely a necklace." "It's not just the necklace," I argued, holding onto my wine glass a little too firmly. "It's all of it. Things have been moving around, and this morning I discovered the necklace on my bathroom sink." Mira arched an eyebrow. "Are you certain you didn't simply forget where you placed it?" I gave a headshake. Since my mother passed away, I had not touched the wretched thing. Nevertheless, there it was, resting on the wash basin as though it had independently emerged from the lockbox. I leaned down and whispered, "I'm telling you, there's something going on." Mira smiled pitifully at me, the type of smile you give someone who's lost their mind, but you're too nice to tell them. "You're worn out. Take some time off. Take a nap. Relax. Like sleep would solve this." I lay in bed that night and looked up at the ceiling. The only sound in the flat was the slight buzz of the metropolis below. I would try to close my eyes and let myself go asleep, but each time I would doze off, I would wake up feeling as though someone was watching me. Then the scratching started. It began faintly at first, like fingernails on glass. I initially believed it to be the wind and the buildings creaking, but it became more relentless, more loud. With my heart racing in my chest, I sat up. The loo was the source of the noise. I pushed myself out of bed, feeling as though every step would take an eternity. I turned on the bathroom light as soon as I got there, partly expecting to see nothing. But there it was, the necklace staring back at me from the wash basin. And something moved in the mirror behind me. I made a sudden turn, but there was nobody inside. 2 days later, the notes began to arrive. Small things at first, like a post-it note with the words "Don't forget" written on it in a sloppy handwriting that strangely looked familiar. At the moment, I didn't give it any thought. Maybe it was a prank from Mira, or maybe I wrote it while in a daze. The messages then became more focused, though, more uncomfortable. "Inspect the wardrobe. She's not finished yet." My mother's handwriting appeared on each occasion. I gave up on sleep. I could hear the slight rustle of paper and the scraping every time I closed my eyes, and there would be a fresh note every morning, much more mysterious than the previous one. I made an effort to discard the jewelry. One night I threw it into the river and watched it sink under the dark water. That seemed like the end of it to me. However, the necklace was still there when I got back to my flat, nicely perched on my pillow. In a state of desperation, I turned to a psychic Mira had recommended, but she was more of a last choice than a source of genuine assistance. The store was hidden in a dim lane between a liquor store and a laundromat, with thick drapes covering its windows. Lucia, the psychic, greeted me with a knowing gaze and had icy, glassy eyes. She said, "You've come about the collector," even before I could say anything. A beat skipped in my heart. "What is it that?" Lucia took a seat across from me and looked directly at me. The collector is an entity that clings to items, things associated with sentimental significance or suffering. It thrives on loss, fear, and grief. A shiver went down my spine. "Do you mean the necklace?" "That was my mother's." She gave a nod. "Furthermore, your mother wasn't its first casualty. The collector takes people, not just objects. After it selects a family, it won't let up until it consumes them all." I leaned closer, trembling. "Is it possible to stop it?" Lucia's gaze became gloomy. "Not at all. The only thing to do is postpone it." The final note I got was not handwritten. "Time's up" was inscribed deeply and jaggedly, almost like it was carved by claws into the wall over my bed. The scratching came back that evening, louder than before, resonating throughout the flat like nails on stone. The necklace sparkled in the little light as it rested on my bedside table. I was aware of its desires. I realized that I could no longer avoid it. I felt the atmosphere around me get heavier as I gazed at the necklace. The room appeared to get darker as the lights flickered. My actions no longer matched my reflection in the mirror. It was motionless, grinning as it observed me. The cold metal of the necklace burned my skin when I took it up. Then, from behind me, I heard her voice, that of my mother. "Sophia, come home." I was in the collector's clutches. I could feel the necklace pulling tighter around my throat and the weight of its presence crushing me. One reality that the mirror revealed to me was one in which I wasn't alone. With sad eyes and outstretched fingers, my mother stood there, wanting to hug me. And I realized there was no way out as I gasped for air. The collector had taken advantage of my mother, and now it was my turn. Before the darkness completely engulfed me, I last saw the necklace sparkling in the dim light, ready for its new owner to take my place. The collector never leaves. It waits, and when it chooses you, there's no way out. I made an effort to remove it. The necklace, the one featuring the delicately twisted chain and the subtle shimmer that appeared to capture the light even in the absence of light. I threw it into the river that runs behind my house, watched as the current sucked it up and sunk it into the murky sea. I believed it to be over. However, it was there when I crawled into bed that night. The chain was twisted like a noose and lay soaking in cold, river-soaked muck on the pillow next to me. That's when I caught the first murmur. Really, that wasn't a sound. It seemed more like a breath coming in contact with my skull's interior right behind my ear. Mine. It was a restless night for me. The voice of the whisper never went away, encircling and drowning my thoughts. By morning, I was certain of two things. The necklace and I would not be leaving, at least not alive. When I first saw the house, it felt foreign. Though I was familiar with its shape, a crooked silhouette against the sky, from old pictures my grandma had saved, there was something different about it when I stood in front of it and saw it rise out of the mist. After my great-grandmother passed away, I was given the Near Bay house owned by the Novak family, as well as a letter referring to unresolved business. The place had been abandoned for years. The garden was overgrown and gnawing at the house like a helpless beast, attempting to get out, and the windows were clouded over with dirt. Although I was on the verge of selling the property right away, my curiosity kept getting the better of me. I was drawn to the house because of its solitude, the dense fog that rolled in from the Pacific, and the weight of generations of Novak history. My mother had never talked much about her side of the family. Inside, the air was stuffy and thick with dust and something else, something very old. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, each one sounding like a sigh. I started by looking around the downstairs, which had rooms full of artifacts from a bygone era, including oil paintings, rusted cutlery, and heavy furniture. However, the attic felt, well, strange. A burst of frigid air carried the tiniest hint of decay and sea salt as I pulled the cable to open the trapdoor. I wasn't alone up there, not really. On the third day, I discovered the box. The attic was filled with misplaced items and broken down furniture, but in the far corner, under a sheet coated in dust, I found a beautiful wooden chest. Though it was small, roughly the size of a shoebox, it was etched with odd symbols that appeared to move and alter when you weren't staring at them. There were jewelry pieces within, necklaces, brooches, and rings, each more exquisite and lovely than the last. Their age was beyond anything I had ever witnessed. Their exquisite artistry was almost mesmerizing, as though they were created by hands that knew secrets that no living person ought to know. I should have been in awe, or perhaps curious. Rather, I experienced a feeling of fear and an unexplainable tightness in my chest. Though deep down I knew differently, I forced myself to believe they were simply family relics handed down through the years. They were not your typical trinkets. They had a problem of some kind. I chose to keep the box shut. But the dreams began that night. I initially believed that the nightmares were the result of my mind playing tricks on me as it processed the strangeness of the house and the village's unsettling solitude. The jewelry wasn't laying motionless in the box when I dreamed I was standing in the attic gazing at it. As though guided by unseen hands, they gently rotated while hovering in mid-air. Soft, indiscernible whispers filled the air, speaking to me in a language I didn't comprehend but could feel in my bones. The box was open when I woke up, and on the floor next to my bed was one of the necklaces, the exact one I'd dreamed about. How it got there is a mystery to me. I had left the jewelry inside the attic and locked it, but it had followed me somehow. The jewelry reappeared every night, appearing in increasingly bizarre places, such under my pillow, on my bathroom counter, and once even in my coat pocket when I walked out. Each time the murmurs became closer and louder, their breath caressing my skin like an unwanted lover. By the end of the week, I wasn't sure if I was still dreaming, or if the house had started dreaming through me. There were symbols all around. They were first limited to the jewelry, those odd moving shapes that were difficult for me to concentrate on. However, I soon began to notice them elsewhere, etched into the windowsills, carved into the attic's wooden beams, and even visible in the condensation on the bathroom mirror. They followed me around, showing up in obscure corners of my eyesight while I wasn't even trying to find them. I looked into them, but there were no answers in any book or internet. An odd, haunting look crossed the face of the town historian when I asked her. "You ought to go," she murmured. "There are things that should not be disturbed." But I couldn't leave. The house wouldn't let me. The murmurs had gotten louder, coming from the darkness now. During the day, I could hear them in the flooring, the walls, and even in the wind rattling the windows. And with them began the scratching, a gentle, persistent sound akin to nails scraping wood. I wasn't sure how much longer I could take it. The jewelry kept coming back, the whispers turned into words I could barely understand, and the nights turned into a blur of waking nightmares. The attic door was being repeatedly scratched, demanding that I go back inside. The whispers were no longer limited to the house, they were inside my head, invading my thoughts and transforming my fear into something more sinister. I began to see things that were either unreal or real. At the periphery of my vision, there were flickering shadows that moved unexpectedly. When I touched the jewelry, it felt alive, pulsing with a weird energy that made my skin crawl. I made one attempt to depart. I packed my luggage, got my car keys, and headed out of Near Bay on the winding route. However, my vehicle died halfway through the forest, and the fog grew thicker until I could only see a few feet ahead of me. I made a U-turn. The voices were waiting for me that night. They weren't offended. They exhibited patience, like they knew I was never going to get away. I don't recall making the decision to return to the attic, and yet here I was, looking down at the jewelry from the wooden trunk in front of me. It lost its lovely appearance. It appeared to be famished. Now the voices were overwhelming, permeating every nook and cranny of the space and encircling me like a tempest. The jewelry writhed and twisted in the box, like in an attempt to break free. It was no longer motionless. The necklace that I had tossed into the river all those nights ago was there when I reached for it. As soon as my fingers touched it, the house seemed to exhale, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through the floorboards. The walls shook, and then silence. I thought it was over. I thought for one brief, foolish moment that I had won. But then I saw the symbols, glowing faintly on my skin, twisting up my arms, curling around my neck like the necklace I now wore, tighter and tighter until I could hardly breathe. The house didn't want me to leave. It never had. And now I never will. They say the house in Near Bay is haunted, that the last person who lived there, some woman named Emily, disappeared without a trace. They found her car on the side of the road, her suitcase still in the trunk, but no sign of her. But the house, it's still there, waiting. And if you listen closely, you can hear it. The whispers carried on the wind, telling you to come closer, telling you they're not finished yet. Thank you for tuning into this chilling chapter of Fear Files. We hope it left you questioning the shadows around you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the darkness we shared tonight. Until next time, stay curious and stay afraid.